Another valuable term in qualitative research is the notion of the researcher as bricoleur and the research product as a bricolage. And the researcher as bricoleur is interesting because it asks you to think of the researcher as someone who assembles pieces of material almost like different fabrics that can be used and sewn together to create a kind of quilt, with the understanding that it creates a patchwork of different designs and different elements that, when put together, create a kind of picture. So thinking about your research as a bricolage means using methods sometimes strategically, sometimes in a fashion that you create based on the context and based on the way in which you engage in the research and based on the research question. So one good example of this is a community-based project that I was involved in, which was a partnership between researchers at the University of Windsor, myself, Jane Koo, and research graduate students who were asked to partner with community agencies to examine and explore the extent to which Windsor as a city was a welcoming city for immigrant newcomers. Now, in order to conduct the project, we wanted to create a picture of Windsor as a place in order to identify what we called benchmarks or identify the attributes that made Windsor potentially welcoming, while at the same time identifying some of the attributes that may have made it exclusive and not welcoming. And that required using and drawing on different ways in which we could think about Windsor as a place and its residents. So we determined that we would need multi-methods. And so some of the methods that we used that pulled together that created that quilt was to conduct interviews with immigrant newcomers, but also to conduct interviews with community stakeholders, people who were involved in some way engaging with newcomers, particularly through service delivery, people who were involved in community agencies and voluntary sector agencies or in providing services. Anything from English as a second language training to community health care services. So we conducted research interviews with those two types of participants, and we also determined that in order to think about Windsor as a place, it was important to try to capture how Windsor was constructed as a place. And in that case, we decided to add two dimensions to the research process. One was to include an analysis of media. We thought that media, local newspaper, would be a good way of documenting the extent to which immigrant newcomers were recognized as being a part of the social fabric of Windsor. We wanted to know, were they represented, were their lives represented, or were they in some way represented only in particular ways and not in others? So we conducted a fairly extensive discourse analysis of the depiction of immigrants in local news. That allowed us to map out a kind of local hegemonic culture of the way in which immigrants were included or excluded from the way Windsor was depicted as a place. In addition to that, we conducted a survey, and the survey was an attempt to capture just how, or the degree to which, immigrants or cultural diversity was recognized as being important to the membership and the decision-making and the mandates of the community agencies, which were ideally delivering some kind of service to immigrant newcomers. We tried to then create a picture. It was a partial picture, because qualitative research always is a partial picture of the way in which people might conduct themselves, or in way in which people engage. And in that way, we were able to say that Windsor was a place that had a certain amount of inclusion, where immigrant newcomers did feel that they could belong. But at the same time, there were areas where we could enhance our inclusion by allowing for immigrants to be more recognized as important social and cultural resources. And it was only by using multiple methods that we were able to capture what I think was a fairly complex picture of Windsor as a place.